Order, order. Question to the Secretary of State for Defence. I call Minister Jeremy Quinn to answer the substantive question number 1 from Gareth Bacon. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And before turning to question 1, on behalf of the Government, I wish to pay tribute to Sergeant Gavin Hillier of the Welsh Guards, who tragically died in an accident during live firing exercises in Wales earlier this month. Sergeant Hillier's distinguished service throughout his career are a tribute not only to his own dedication to duty, but also to his family and his regiment, who continue to prepare for operations in Iraq later this year. Turning to question 1. May I thank my honourable friend for his close interest in this issue, an interest actively pursued by the Right Honourable and Honourable friends, the members of Preseli Pembrokeshire, North West Cambridgeshire, Devizes and other colleagues. The MOD no longer have any ongoing military requirement for these homes, which we therefore intend to hand back to Annington, helping to meet obligations under our agreements. I regret that despite the MOD producing a significant package of support, which we hoped might assist Annington to allow our tenants in many, though not all cases, to remain in situ, this was not a course Annington felt able to pursue.
Let's go to Gareth Bacon. Gareth.
Mr. Speaker, I join the Minister, and I'm sure the whole House, in sympathy for the family and friends of Sergeant Hillier. A number of my constituents in Biggin Hill are keen to remain in their homes. Is there no way that Annington Homes can facilitate this? And if not, given that we are still battling the COVID pandemic, is there any way that the Minister can provide for a longer notice period to help provide my constituents with greater certainty at this very difficult time?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to say I have some good news for my honourable friend and his constituents. Mindful of the representations made by my honourable friends, the facts that these are packages of houses rather than single units, and the ongoing COVID restrictions, I'm pleased to confirm that we will be extending the notice period to the 31st of March 2022. This will mean that civilian tenants will have received over 18 months' notice in total. Furthermore, Annington have confirmed that they have no in-principle objection to selling these properties to local authorities or other social housing providers. I would stress that any such deals would be a commercial proposition between the social housing providers and Annington, but I hope that the additional time provided may help enable such transactions to be progressed. I'm writing to my honourable friend and other affected MPs on this subject today.
Substantive question to the Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, once again. The Defence Estate Optimisation Portfolio is a 25-year multi-billion investment in modernising MOD basing, providing resilience and ensuring that our service personnel can train in centres of excellence alongside those beside whom they would fight. We routinely review and assess the programme in the light of evolving requirements, including the contents of the integrated review. However, the fundamental drivers of the programme are unlikely to change.
Let's go to Christian Matheson. Christian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The decision to site the entire Army presence in the northwest in Wheaton Barracks, putting all our eggs in one basket, will damage the operational and the recruitment footprint of the Army in the northwest. If the government was to retain the Dale Barracks in Chester, it would provide easy access to the southern part of the northwest, north part of the Midlands and North Wales. So will the government now look again, please, at the decision to sell off the Dale Barracks and let it retain its historic role in the city of Chester?
Forward.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman has spoken with passion in the past about the retention of Dale Barracks and does so again. While we continue to speak to local stakeholders about alternative uses of the site, I can assure the honourable gentleman that no disposal will take place before 2027 at the earliest. I can also assure the honourable gentleman that the armed forces will continue to be able to provide support to the North West in the future and indeed across the whole of the United Kingdom.
Let's go to Shadow Minister Khalid Mahmood. Khalid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What steps has the Ministry of Defence taken to ensure sound financial sustainability of the defence estate after the National Audit Office found in 2016 that the estate had an £8.5 billion shortfall in funding over the next 30 years? Continued National Audit Office reports have shown the defence estate faces a serious shortfall in investment. It is clear there is a direct link between poor infrastructure and increasing risk to military effectiveness. What steps has the Minister taken to reverse this decline?
Minister.
I'm pleased to reassure the honourable gentleman that £18 million a year is spent on single living accommodation. There's additional funding provided through the £200 million package announced in July of last year, and the frontline commands intend to invest £1.5 billion in new build and upgrade programmes to accommodation over the next 12 years. So it is an issue that we are alive to, we focus on. It isn't within the top 12 of reasons for people to leave the army, as stated in the surveys, but it is incredibly important. We wish to look after the welfare of all the people who serve defence, and I do not wish to say any further about future funding, because that will be covered in announcements in due course, but it is something we take very seriously.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question number 4.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I should like to answer questions 4, 5 and 6 together. The threat of cyber attack on UK interests is real. Every day we witness malicious interference from adversary states and hostile actors. We're continually protecting our systems and have previously called out activity from Russia, China and Iran. Our defensive cyber programmes are delivering on an extensive suite of capabilities. However, cyber defence is only part of our approach. A core element of broader deterrence is integrating our offensive cyber capabilities into our military operations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank my right honourable friend for his answer. Can I also particularly welcome that the National Cyber Unit is going to be based in the northwest of England. And in saying that, can I urge the Secretary of State to look sympathetically on the case of hosting that in Lancashire? We already have a really strong track record of supporting our armed forces, from the thousands of men and women who sign up from our county to manufacturing the Typhoon and hopefully the Tempest in the future.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. I certainly hear what he says, and as another Lancashire MP, I'm conscious of the good news that the PM announced that it will be based in the north of England, and I think we will obviously go through the processes of selecting where that is. I think, from my point of view, the lessons of when Bletchley Park and its successors moved to Cheltenham and the impact it had on Cheltenham and levelling up in that area as opposed to a big city should be something we should also reflect on. I think it's incredibly important in that whole levelling up agenda that we don't just focus on cities, but we focus on towns.
Maybe you could bring all the Lancashire MPs together. Let's go to Bolton with Mark Logan. Mark Logan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And our Prime Minister and Secretary of State are backing the North by developing the national cyber force here. Some say Manchester, others say Lancashire. Surely Bolton is the place for it, with a foot in Greater Manchester, but our heart firmly in Lancashire.
Come on, Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, it's tempting to ask for Bolton to be returned to Lancashire alongside Warrington from the early 70s reforms. I think I have to declare I am or was at one stage a secretary for Campaign for Real Lancashire. I think you were probably a co-secretary with me at one stage. Look, I hear the honourable friend loud and clear. The strengths of these mill towns, whether it's Bolton, Wigan, Warrington, Preston in my constituency, Chorley, Mr. Speaker, the contribution they've made to Britain's industrial base and the next generation, which is obviously cyber, is something that we should not undervalue. And I'll certainly listen to all the arguments put forward. But certainly the National Cyber Force is a mix of GCHQ and MOD. We have a proud record of supporting the MOD and defence in the north, and I look forward to continuing that.
Ruth Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the weekend's announcement that a full spectrum approach will be taken to the UK's cyber capability. Can my right honourable friend confirm that the integrated review will include a strategy for working with industry great and small so that robust cyber defence can be maintained across our entire economy?
State.
Yes. After the Defence Command Paper is announced on Monday, a week today, the Defence Industrial Strategy will be launched the following day, and that will give us an opportunity to obviously indicate not only investments in our more traditional industrial base, but obviously in the new and future domains such as digital, cyber, space, etc. It's incredibly important. Britain is one of the world leaders in both applying our cyber technology and investing in it, and I predict it will have something to say about that.
Shadow Secretary of State John Healey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I, on behalf of the official opposition, offer my tribute to the service of Sergeant Gavin Hillier and say to him, his family, his friends and his comrades, our condolences are with them. Mr. Speaker, I certainly welcome the weekend news that the integrated review will commit the UK to full spectrum cyber, as the Honourable Lady has just said, although I do strongly feel that announcements of important government policy like this should be made in Parliament and not in the press. Can I say to the Secretary of State, isn't the wider security lesson from cyber and other grey zone threats that more civil military planning, training and exercising is required? And when some countries are well ahead of us, will the integrated review catch up with this need for full spectrum society resilience?
Mr. Speaker, I hear what the Honourable Gentleman says. I would take one issue that us catching up. I was the Cybersecurity Minister, I was the Minister of State for Security for a considerable period of time. Britain actually led the world, both in NATO, for example, where we were the first to offer cyber offensive capability, but also in our programmes, the National Cyber Security Programme that spent billions on enhancing capability right across, not just military, but civil sector, predominantly civil sector. The National Cyber Security Centre is a first. Almost none of them are in Europe. We are one of the first to have that, to be able to advise both business, the private individual, government and about how to keep themselves strong and secure. There's always more to do. There are lessons to be learnt around the world, but I would certainly say to the right honourable member opposite, Britain, when it comes to cybersecurity, has a lot of innovation, a lot of strengths. It is a dangerous world out there in cyber, and I certainly agree with him that one of the ways to do it is to make sure that we constantly work with our friends and allies to deliver it.
Let's go over to another expert, Dr. Julian Lewis.
Speaker, does my right honourable friend accept that whilst the cyber threat to critical national infrastructure can paralyse a society which is then subject to attack by more conventional means, we also have to maintain the methods and equipment to counter-attack anything involving conventional military force? So is he satisfied that the integrated review, whilst recognising the role of cyber, also recognises the continuing role of conventional defence?
My right honourable friend makes a really valid point, and absolutely we do. And the lessons, and the important thing about both the command paper and the integrated review is learning the lessons of today. So the lessons we learned from Syria is that when you tackle Daesh, you tackle their cyber offence, their cyber campaign, in tandem with the military campaign that we use to take apart their leadership and indeed their evil task that they were setting out to cause attacks. Absolutely it is the case. You can't have one without the other. But we should also recognise that the growing vulnerability our forces and our civil society have to cyber as we become more dependent on cyber means we have to absolutely take a very strong lead in defending against that.
Substantive question to Minister Mercer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Veterans can access the same services provided by the Ministry of Defence no matter where in the world they live.
Let's go to Andrew Gwynn. Andrew.
Can I thank the Minister for that answer? Because the Covenant rightly offers areas like education and family well-being, having a home, starting a new career, access to healthcare, financial assistance and discounted services to veterans. What I would like to know, though, is what the Ministry is doing to ensure that the undertakings we have as a nation are actually delivered upon for veterans who now live overseas? And is there a specific budget for this vital work to make sure that those veterans are accessing the services they qualify for?
Minister.
So there is not a carve-out in the budget for veterans who live overseas, but we are equally committed to ensuring that the Armed Forces Covenant works for them, as it does in this country, by introducing the Armed Forces Bill in the coming months that is going to legislate for the first time to ensure that there can be no disadvantage in the discharge of their duties from local authorities of health, housing and education, and I look forward to my honourable friend supporting the bill.
We have further substantive question to the Minister.
Defence regularly monitors several metrics to gauge service personnel satisfaction levels, including for accommodation and pay, via the Armed Forces Continuous Attitude Survey.
Let's go to Alan Brown. Alan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Army's been instrumental in the fight against COVID, from assisting with logistics and being directly involved in testing and vaccination programmes. And yet their rewards are pay freeze at a time when no pay is one of the factors that causes people to leave the armed forces. And the government study should show that. So I'd like to ask the Minister, why was Dominic Cummings awarded a huge pay rise, but yet the Armed Forces personnel are not deemed worthy of one?
No, I don't have responsibility for the Prime Minister's advisors, clearly, and the satisfaction around pay. I'm clear that pay is one of the reasons that people stay in the military, and actually, if he looks forward to the integrated review, we will be looking to announce a direction of travel on this in due course.
We now come to SNP spokesperson Stuart Malcolm MacDonald with 2 questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And on behalf of the Scottish National Party, send condolences to Sergeant Hillier's family. On this issue of pay rises and satisfaction more generally, it's been a bone of contention in the House for many years, and the numbers speak for themselves. 4 in 10 serving personnel don't think that the pay they receive reflects the work that they do. Why?
Mr. Speaker, the crushing irony of our people who work in Scotland having to pay more in tax and therefore take home less pay, and my honourable friend raising this point is not lost on those who serve. Pay is one of a number of factors that people speak about when the Armed Forces Continuous Attitude Survey comes through. It is by no means the primary factor. We're constantly reviewing it, and I'm comfortable that we offer a world-class package to our people.
Sir Malcolm.
Yet again, Mr. Speaker, the Minister is rather poorly briefed. The lowest paid members of the armed forces in Scotland actually pay less in tax. And if he wants to talk exemptions, that's a power that lies in the Treasury. It's not a tax power that lies with the Scottish Government. But let me press the Minister on this. When the integrated review does publish tomorrow, will it contain something, anything at all, to reverse this trend on satisfaction? And will he apologise to the armed forces who have had a kick in the teeth with their pay rise being paused, given everything they've done for everyone over the COVID crisis?
Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. This will be the first strategic review to have a specific address to our people. They are our finest asset. They are rewarded not only financially, but through the choice of career on offer to them. I'd encourage my honourable friend to read that when it comes out, and I'm more than happy to have a conversation with him after that.
We have a further substantive question for you, Minister.
The Office for Veterans Affairs champions our veterans' mental health and wellbeing needs at the heart of government. This month, NHS England launched Operation Courage, bringing together 3 NHS England veterans' mental health services with a single point of access. Courage is truly a game changer for veterans in the UK, including in the North East.
I think they're grouped as well.
Oh, sorry, with permission, I'll take 15 and 16 as well with that, Mr. Speaker.
Excellent. Let's go to Rosie Cooper. Rosie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Royal British Legion has said the current extortionate charges to Commonwealth veterans to settle in the UK is unfair and should end. We completely agree. So could the Minister tell us what he's doing to end this unjust treatment to those who've risked their lives for our country?
Mr. Speaker, let me be absolutely clear. This is a policy that started under the previous government. This is the first government that has promised a pathway to residency for those who serve. We will deliver that. We're looking to consult in the coming months. This has been a long-term injustice for our Foreign and Commonwealth Service personnel, and under this government we're going to correct it.
Let's go to Kerry McCarthy. Kerry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There seems to be some really good schemes that have been awarded funding under the Positive Pathways programme. But what is the Minister doing to ensure that veterans know about these schemes? And also, how can we ensure that they're not just like short-term engagement with veterans, but they do really offer that seamless route of care and support that is talked about in the documentation?
So one of my biggest challenges in this role is not the fact that there isn't pathways or care there. It is, in fact, getting people to understand and to really be able to access fantastic world-class healthcare and career advice and transition and a seamless progress from the military into civilian life. It's an ongoing effort, and I welcome my honourable friend's efforts to help me with that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The extra £10 million allocated in the budget to supporting veterans' mental health is a welcome step which the opposition has been calling for, However, there is still a large disparity between physical and mental health support, and this extra money works out to just an extra £4 per veteran. COVID-19 has impacted heavily on veteran charities' ability to raise funds and conduct their vital work. Will the Minister therefore commit to protecting our protectors and ensure that the funding is there for veterans to get the support that they need?
Mr Speaker, the £10 million announced by the Chancellor in the budget was another important commitment, but the greater commitment that we've seen in the last few weeks through the launch of Operation Courage is the first integrated single front door approach to mental health care in our NHS for our veterans. It truly is a game changer, and I would urge veterans up and down the country to make sure they're fully aware of what it offers. And I will be going from this place to make sure every GP practice and every NHS trust in the UK is part of that programme to make sure we do our duty by those who serve.
We now come to Shadow Minister Stephen Morgan.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. 5 years ago, the Government announced that veterans could access the state-of-the-art £300 million Defence Medical Rehabilitation Centre, but it's seen just 22 people in the last 3 years. What steps will the Minister be taking to widen veteran access to these facilities and make a meaningful difference to the day-to-day lives of those who have sustained serious injuries during their service?
So I've commissioned a review into veterans' access to the DNRC. It's an important project. To be clear, in its original specification, it was to as a national rehab centre, but I do recognise that there are opportunities for veterans to access world-class health there. I've asked the veteran community and others to go away and do a piece of work and understand the ask. We will then address that with DNRC, and I hope we can find a path through the middle to make sure that we're looking after those who've served.
We now have a substantive question to Minister Heath.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The work of our armed forces in supporting the COVID response is popular around the country and popular in Parliament too. So with your permission, may I group this with questions 18, 19, 20 and 21. Defence has supported the NHS through construction of Nightingale hospitals, PPE distribution, planning and logistical support, scientific advice, testing and vaccine delivery. Currently, Defence is providing 199 medical personnel to regional NHS trusts and 321 general duties personnel providing a range of support tasks, including support to the ambulance services. 1,600 Defence medical professionals are also embedded in the National Health Service.
Right, let's go to Elliot Colbert. Elliot.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'd like to also pay tribute to the Armed Forces personnel in Carshalton and Wallington for all they have done to help tackle coronavirus. So will my honourable friend join me in thanking the hundreds of defence personnel across London who have been seconded to hospitals throughout the duration of the pandemic, fulfilling both medical and general roles. But could he also outline the plans the MOD has for continuing this offer of support in the coming months?
Well, Mr Speaker, I'll certainly join with my honourable friend, as I hope will the rest of the House, in thanking Defence personnel for supporting the NHS across London over the last year. This thanks should also recognise the NHS and frontline workers that it's been our great privilege to work alongside at the strategic level here in Whitehall, all the way down to in wards and in the back of ambulances across the country throughout the pandemic. Besides MACA's support for specific tasks, Defence has an enduring presence within the NHS for training and personnel placements. Work is being done to expand that for future opportunities, given the experience of our people working alongside the brilliant NHS clinicians throughout the pandemic.
Right, let's go to Laura Trott. Laura.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Will the Minister join me in thanking the military personnel who set up the asymptomatic testing sites in Sevenoaks and Swanley? The 35 Engineer Regiment managed the whole process swiftly and efficiently and made it as pleasant as possible to visit. They deserve to be recognised.
Well, Mr Speaker, I absolutely join my honourable friend in praising the fabulous work of the 35 Engineer Regiment and the Kent Resilience Unit, who supported Kent County Council to deliver their community testing programme and established the Sevenoaks asymptomatic testing site. Armed Forces personnel have been working tirelessly across the United Kingdom to help tackle this pandemic, and I know the Honourable Lady is not alone in wanting to pass her thanks to all of those who have done such amazing work.
Let's go to Dr Neil Hudson. Dr Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In times of crisis, such as foot and mouth disease 20 years ago, flooding catastrophes, and now the coronavirus pandemic, the armed forces have been deployed effectively to keep us safe by working closely with the emergency services, the NHS, and local authorities. Will my honourable friend join me in paying tribute to the thousands of UK Armed Forces personnel who, aside from keeping us safe, are ready to be deployed in national times of crisis and have bolstered the vaccine effort, supported hospitals, assisted with COVID testing, and much, much more?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, again, I thank my honourable friend for his comments, and I wholeheartedly join him in recognising the consistency and excellence of the support that the armed forces have provided to the United Kingdom, both in the past and throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. It stands worth to mention, Mr. Speaker, that of course throughout times like this, they are not just working on homeland resilience and have continued with the many, many jobs they have to do overseas to keep our country safe there as well. It's an extraordinary effort, and it's right they should be recognised this way in the House.
Brian.
Will the Minister join me in thanking the 35 military personnel who continue to support the frontline team at South Central Ambulance Service, which serves my constituents? And will you confirm that the MOD will continue to be there by their side as we move towards the end of all national restrictions on the 21st of June?
Mr. Speaker, I of course join my honourable friend in thanking and acknowledging the fine work of the Armed Forces personnel supporting the South Central Ambulance Service, as well as those who have been supported in the North West, London and the Welsh Ambulance Services as well. Supporting COVID-19 pandemic response remains Defence's main priority, and I can confirm that Defence will continue to provide support whilst our assistance is requested and the requirement endures.
Let me go back to Andrea Jenkins. Andrea.
Last summer, I met with members of our armed forces in my constituency of Morley and Outward, who were undertaking tests for people who may have COVID. These brave men and women are British heroes, and throughout this pandemic have done everything possible to keep the people of our great nation safe. Can the Minister detail the steps that are being taken to strengthen support services for our armed forces and their families, so that we can show them the same support that they have shown us?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is quite right to notice just how extraordinary the work of our armed forces has been. And of course, they've accepted great risk during the pandemic in doing the things that we've asked them to do. And that will have been some concern for their families as well. We've tried to make sure that whilst they've been deployed, often at short notice, the welfare provisions for them have been as good as they can possibly be. But we also recognise the demands of service life and what that can have on the lives and careers of family members. So we're now, with the great work of my colleague, whose constituency escapes me, but Mr. Salou, Mr. Speaker, forgive me, has put together the excellent work that he's done on the Armed Forces Family Strategy and Action Plan, and we'll be looking to develop those ideas fully over the next few months.
Substantive question to you from Geraint Davis.
We have established a support package of 14,400 personnel that are on standby to support COVID-19 and winter resilience tasks. These personnel have a range of diverse capabilities, including planning, logistical and medical. Approximately 700 personnel are currently deployed in support of the COVID-19 vaccine rollout.
Let's go to Geraint Davis. Geraint.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to give my massive thanks to all the military and defence personnel who've done such a fantastic job in establishing our field hospitals and in the vaccination programme. They certainly deserve a pay rise. But can I ask, of the 250 teams of vaccinators that were promised in December, how many of those have now been deployed, and indeed how many in Wales?
Mr. Speaker, 42 of the vaccination teams are now deployed as part of the Vaccine Quick Response Force of the 252 that are available. In Wales, 34 medical personnel are directly supporting the administering of vaccines, with approximately 150 personnel helping to coordinate and operate vaccine centres.
That's another substantive question for you, Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the number of personnel currently serving in the Army as full-time trade-trained strength is 76,350. This is supported by 26,920 Army Reserves.
Let's go to Stephen Bonner. Stephen Bonner.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for that answer. But for years now, the Ministry of Defence has staggered from one recruitment crisis to another. as it has struggled and failed to meet its personnel targets, including the broken promise of 12,500 personnel to be based in Scotland by the year 2020. The government is now set to cut a further 10,000 soldiers. Can the Minister confirm if there are any regiments that are due to be disbanded completely, and whether these further cuts will pertain to Scotland, which of course was promised thousands more personnel, not thousands less?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman tempts me to preempt the announcement next week. He'll have heard my colleagues say already that these are things he just has to wait 7 days more to understand.
We have another substantive question to Minister Mercer.
Mr. Speaker, the Office for Veterans Affairs champions our veterans' mental health and wellbeing needs at the heart of government, this month launching Op Courage, bringing together 3 NHS England veterans' mental health services with a single point of access, something we promised to do when we were established 18 months ago.
Let's go to Tiomara. Jay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But waiting times for face-to-face appointments under the Veterans Transition Intervention and Liaison Mental Health Services was 37 days in 2020 against the government's own target of 14. North East charities such as Forward Assist and Anxious Minds in Newcastle do fantastic work to support veterans in civilian life, but have been overwhelmed with demand. Does the Minister agree that care for the mental well-being of our armed forces veterans must begin before they leave the armed forces? And what is he doing to ensure they are better supported in that transition to civilian life?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't recognise the waiting times that my honourable friend relays to me, but I'm happy to write to her in what I understand them to be. Let me be really clear that the funding that has gone into veterans' mental health, £16 million written into the long-term plan for the NHS, rising to £20 million by 2022-2023. I'm absolutely determined that world-class veterans' mental health care will be available in this country. Op Courage, which we launched last week, is the start of that, and we will continue on that progress.
Let's go to Shadow Minister Sharon Thompson. Sharon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week we saw Meghan Markle speaking out about how her pleas for support for her mental health crisis were dismissed. Whilst obviously the military is a very different institution, military charities continue to see an increase in demand for mental health support, although people do still struggle to speak out. What steps is the Minister taking to help reduce the stigma around mental health in the military and veteran community?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I pay tribute to my honourable friend for all the championing she does in this area. Mental health has come on leaps and bounds, particularly in the last 5 to 10 years. Actually, this year we're introducing mandatory mental health and fitness training for our armed forces personnel that they will undergo every year. We are fundamentally changing our approach to mental health, fundamentally making it easier for people to come forward. It does take courage, but I encourage all those who have mental health concerns to speak up. There is help available and you can get better.
A substantive question to Minister Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ministers have regular discussions with the Submarine Delivery Agency on the progress of the submarine dismantling project, and the MOD hold regular discussions with the Office for Nuclear Regulation, who are satisfied with the safety performance at Rosyth Dockyard.
Let's go to Douglas Chapman. Douglas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for her response. Any delay in the submarine dismantling programme is of grave concern to my Dunfermline and West Fife constituency, where we accommodate many of these redundant submarines. But can the Minister confirm if the government's commitment to endorse the recommendations of the Public Accounts Committee in 2019 still holds? Or will his department continue to move the goalposts to guarantee that the removal of these boats will remain a taxpayer's nightmare forever?
Mr. Speaker, I believe I'm right in saying that we've adopted now all the recommendations of the PAC report, and we remain committed to continuing to decommission these boats in a safe and swift way. There were minimal, and I've written to the honourable gentleman, there was some small delays due to COVID, but they were minimal, and we are continuing with the programme and are committed to continuing to do so.
Sarah Dines.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As my right honourable friend knows, Number 27.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Armed Forces Bill includes measures to reform the service justice system. This includes the creation of an independent Service Police Complaints Commissioner. In addition, we've commissioned an independent review of policing and prosecutorial process for dealing with serious criminal offending overseas.
Sorry,
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As my right honourable friend knows, there are many service personnel and veterans in Derbyshire Dales, and they expect to see real justice in the service justice system. Can my right honourable friend say what else, other than what's going to be in the Armed Forces Bill, is going to be brought forward to protect justice in the system?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's a suite of measures in the Armed Forces Bill itself, but I think the most significant thing we're introducing is a serious crime unit that is essentially going to make sure that our investigators are skilled and capable and have all the tools they need in order to conduct investigations that are at a standard that will withstand ECHR compliance tests and things like that. We totally understand that there is a need to not only address that, but address the legal side to this through the Overseas Operations Bill. We are absolutely determined that uniform is no hiding place for those who commit offences, and we are determined that as we go forward, we will improve the standard of those investigations, and this will be a serious step towards doing that.
Substantive question to Minister Mercer. 28.
The review by the Independent Advisory Military Subcommittee into the case of medallic recognition for those who participated in the UK's nuclear test programme concluded that it did not meet the level of risk and rigour required for the award of a campaigning medal or clasp. This is an independent process operating to strict criteria. The outcome in no way diminishes the contribution of veterans, and the government remains grateful to all who participated.
Let's go to Catherine McKinnell. Catherine.
Our nuclear test veterans were sent to the South Pacific in the 1950s at great risk to themselves, and they've heard decades of warm rhetoric about their crucial role in the country's defence during the Cold War and beyond, but they lack formal recognition. A constituent recently wrote to me, my dad was a veteran who was present at 2 of the grapple tests on Christmas Island in the 1950s. Sadly, my dad is no longer with us and never got round to seeing the government award a medal or compensation to the veterans. Does the Minister not share my concern that no more nuclear test veterans like my constituent's father pass away with their contribution left unrecognised?
So, Mr. Speaker, their contributions are not unrecognised. We work hard to make sure that there is a programme of support for those who have become ill as a result of their exposure to nuclear tests. It's a consistent process that we're always refining. A review that I undertook 8 months ago again tightened up that support. The medallic system is out with the control of ministers. It always has been. It's rightly in that position, but I'm determined to continue to do all I can to support this cohort of nuclear test veterans.
No substantive question to the Secretary of State.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to answer questions 29 and 30 together. Our people are our finest assets. The government will continue to invest in our extraordinary armed forces personnel, and we are committed to ensuring the UK continues to have the world-class armed forces that it deserves. I will publish further details of my plans on the 22nd of March.
29 is withdrawn, so we'll go straight to James Daly. James.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would my right honourable friend outline what consultation has been undertaken with our military personnel ahead of the policy changes that will be announced as part of the Integrated Review and Defence Command Paper?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. From the very beginning of this Integrated Review and Defence Reform process, we have engaged with the chiefs and many members of the armed forces across all services. We have also been informed through the process by defence intelligence and other intelligence products to make sure that our plans match not only the threats that we face, but also the capabilities that we should give to the men and women of our armed forces.
Further substantive questions to the Secretary of State. 32.
Mr. Speaker, we greatly value everyone who serves in our armed forces, wherever they come from their contribution to the security of our nation. Non-UK personnel can settle in the United Kingdom after 4 years' service. I'm pleased to confirm that we're extending the time before discharge that applicants can be submitted from 10 to 18 weeks before they leave. In addition, there is an imminent consultation due, and I urge members to contribute to that consultation to try and solve the current issues ongoing around Commonwealth veterans.
Let's go to Dan Jarvis. Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. pay up or pack up. That's the shameful choice presented to our Commonwealth servicemen and women. I am aware of the strength of feeling the Secretary of State has on this issue. So can he confirm when we're going to see the public consultation and whether the reforms promised will apply to veterans and families as well as to serving personnel?
First of all, if I could place on record my apology to the honourable member for the delay in responding to his correspondence. It shouldn't have happened, and I do apologise for it. The consultation is imminent, and we will schedule that in as soon as possible. Once the consultation is published, I'm very happy to sit down with many members as possible to discuss their views on what we are proposing and if they should go further. We can take it from that point. I understand what he is saying. I am keen that whatever we do is fair across all veterans, whether they are Gurkhas or serving personnel or UK national personnel or indeed Commonwealth, because we must make sure there is equity there. But at the same time, I understand the strength of feeling in this House that if you contribute, you should be recognised.
Question 33, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Defence remains able to assist other government departments where appropriate and through prudent planning has continued to provide support when required throughout the pandemic. Mitigation measures such as testing of key personnel and adaptation of working practices has ensured that Defence has maintained both its UK operational and contingent readiness as well as being able to generate the forces we require for our commitments overseas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a proud veteran, I'm delighted to see what our great armed forces has done throughout this pandemic. They continue to go over and above. Will my right honourable friend go over and above in honouring our armed forces to see that they have everything they need in the integrated review to stand proud on the world stage?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to the announcement later in the week and next Monday, but I have a strong suspicion that it will be jam-packed full of opportunities for our men and women to serve at home and around the world in really fulfilling roles that keep our country safer for the future.
We come to topicals with the Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, including in my responsibilities, it is the duty to uphold the duty of care to our workforce. We were all appalled by the reporting we saw of the incident involving members of the RAF regiment at the weekend. The RAF police are investigating the incident and the victims have been offered our full support. The Chief of the Air Staff and I had a discussion about the incident over the weekend, and he has, with my support, acted quickly. He has removed officers from the immediate chain of command without prejudice, pending the findings of a police investigation, and the unit involved, the support weapons flight, will be disbanded with immediate effect. Bullying, harassment and discrimination has no place in our armed forces, and I, and neither will the Chief of the Air Staff, tolerate it.
Let's go to Debbie Abrahams. Debbie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what proportion of servicemen and women are currently deployed in UN peacekeeping? What was it last year, and how is it set to change over the next 3 years?
In the exact proportions I can write to the Honourable Lady. All I can say is there's been a significant increase recently with deployment to Mali of our forces to assist in the United Nations mission there. We also have a number of forces deployed in Somalia, assisting that fragile state in trying to come to terms with the consequences of the civil war. This government is determined to continue to contribute to UN missions wherever we can, lending military support, not in necessarily the operational support, but also in the logistics, the enabling and the humanitarian aid.
Select Committee to Basil.
Mr. Speaker, Russia is rearming, Daesh is regrouping, and China is nudging us out of military and trade partnerships across Africa. Yet we're about to witness a shocking reduction in our conventional hard power and full spectrum capabilities, but which are overshadowed by the fanfare and announcements promoting a tilt towards niche capabilities, including electronic warfare and autonomous platforms. Yes, we must adapt to new threats, but this does not mean that the old threats has disappeared. So severe cuts to our infantry regiments, main battle tanks, armoured fighting vehicles and Hercules C-130s will worry our closest allies and delight our competitors. And regarding the F-35 jets, does the Secretary of State agree that cutting back our order from 138 to 48 will mean that, if required, we could never unilaterally operate both carriers in strike mode simultaneously?
I've listened to the Right Honourable Gentleman's consistent messaging over the last few months, and I think the thing that I think we can all agree with, he said yesterday or last weekend, we must modernise, but first let's agree the threat and then design the right defence posture. That's exactly what we've been doing. Obviously, in the Department of Defence, we've made sure that we've been doing it in conjunction with our serving personnel, and our allies and the threats. And I think playing by sort of Ladybird book of defence design is not the way to progress.
Shadow Secretary of State John Healey.
Speaker, why are Britain's full-time armed forces still 10,000 short of the numbers that the last Defence Review in 2015 said were needed to meet the threats and keep the country safe, and that the Defence Secretary's government pledged to meet?
I've listened to the Right Honourable Gentleman. We're 6,000 under. The strength is 76,500 from the 82,000, which was the pledged. Of course, as he knows, it's well documented that in previous governments, under the previous coalition government and Conservative government, that there was not a satisfactory outcome by the recruiting process. That has now been fixed. Until COVID break, we were on target to fulfil the pipeline and target for that recruiting. That is something that we have to make sure we continue to invest in. It's why we're investing in people. We will continue to invest throughout this process, and you'll see next week announcements that put people at the heart of our defence review.
John Healey.
Well, the Secretary of State may want to check the numbers. I was talking about the full-time armed forces, not the full-time army numbers. He's rightly said before that our forces personnel will go to war alongside robots in the future, but robots don't seize and hold vital ground from the enemy. They don't keep the peace or rebuild broken societies, and they don't give COVID jabs. Can I say to the Secretary of State, size matters, and no government can secure the nations with understrength armed forces. Isn't the truth that over the last decade we've seen our armed forces run down, numbers down, pay down, morale down, and all the indication from stories ahead of tomorrow's integrated review is that ministers are set to make the same mistakes as in the last reviews, with our servicemen and women paying the price for cuts and bad defence budgeting.
The Right Honourable Gentleman seems to forget that for the last 3-4 decades we have had that characteristic where government after government has been over-ambitious and underfunded the defence policy. His government did it, the governments before mine have done the same things. I only have to point him, as I do every defence questions, at the National Audit Office report into his government in 2010's processes, our previous governments, to show that the biggest problem is that we've been promising soldiers, men and women of the armed forces, equipment they never got, or numbers games when just tying them up alongside. That's not the way to confront the enemy. The way to confront the enemy is invest in the people, give them the right equipment to take on the threat, make sure that they are active, busy and forward, and as a soldier, being active, busy and forward is what keeps you engaged and in them.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A cybersecurity conference is one of the only places on earth where women never have to queue for the loo. And that's because there's so few of us in the industry, approximately 10% when I left in 2019. Given that cybersecurity is of vital importance to our nation's defence and that there is a global talent shortage, how will the government work with industry to encourage more women into cybersecurity and also to address the skills gap?
Well, I'm sorry that that's been her experience. I think in the public sector of cybersecurity, the intelligence services that I worked with when I was Security Minister, and indeed in key parts of the armed forces, such as the Signals Regiment, there are higher proportions of women, and I think that is something where the state can lead. And that's why the state did sign up and sponsor both the Cyber First campaign, designed to stimulate amongst girls at school the interest in cyber and to invest in them, and hopefully we're seeing an increase in that. But rest assured, my honourable friend, that with the next stage of this defence review, you will see us making sure that loud and clear the sign "Women are welcome" will be put up above the door.
Emma Hardy. Emma.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I mentioned in the previous defence questions, workers at RAF Leaming have been striking since January over a £5,000 pay disparity. And just last week, Fastlane and Coalport workers walked out over low wages and the looming breakup of their single bargaining unit. What action can the Minister take to stop these loyal staff being exploited?
The Honourable Lady refers to two bits of industrial action or potential industrial action. I have written to her about RAF Leeming in the past. You received that letter last month. Obviously, it's a source of concern when employers and employees fall out, but I'm not going to get into discussions on the specific action involved. We would urge all those involved to come to an agreement.
Let's go to Geraint Davis. Geraint.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I very much welcome the government's efforts to forge new trade links with India. However, given that we share many common security threats and the fact that they're a key strategic ally in the Indo-Pacific region, can my right honourable friend outline what efforts are being made to better strengthen our defence relationship with India?
Mr. Speaker, the UK government is committed to working with the government of India and increasing our efforts to combat shared threats. In particular, the UK is focused on increasing bilateral maritime cooperation in the Indian Ocean and on ensuring a closer defence-industrial relationship in line with Prime Minister Modi's Made in India policy. We are also committed to uplifting our defence education and training relationship to enable us to work together more effectively. I'm certain that the Honourable Gentleman and our friends in India will be hugely excited by what may follow in the integrated review.
Peter Grant. Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The MOD itself estimates that its equipment plan is underfunded by about £8.3 billion in its first 5 years. And we also know that, for example, the MOD will need to spend perhaps billions of pounds to bring its single-person living accommodation up to even a basic minimum tolerable standard. So can the Minister tell us, of the additional money that the Prime Minister trumpeted in the spending review in November, how much of it is going to be genuinely new money and how much of it will be swallowed up to fill these and other existing black holes in the defence budget?
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his question. I'm not going to prejudge and go out in advance of the announcements that are going to be made. They're all going to be made in the next 8 days or so. The Honourable Gentleman will be able to see for himself. But I can assure him we have gone through the numbers very closely, and there is a lot of new money coming into defence. A £24 billion increase in the amount of money being spent on defence. We can see an awful lot of benefit coming through to our armed forces and our personnel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the government's integrated review due to be published imminently, potential investment into programmes such as Tempest would clearly align with the government's agenda for skills development and social value. The defence sector employs unique high-end design and manufacture capabilities across the UK with significant export potential. So can I ask how constituents will benefit from this?
Many constituents will benefit from it. I know the Honourable Gentleman is a fierce advocate for Leonardo helicopters in his part of the world. In that particular case, we really value our strategic partnership arrangements and recognise the contribution they make to UK prosperity. We will shortly be publishing the findings of our review into the defence and security industrial strategy, setting out our strategic approach to a number of sectors.
Let's go to Jamie Stone. Jamie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Some days ago, I read with great interest the piece in the Times saying that the intention is to deploy Royal Navy warships to the High North in order to safeguard trade routes via the Arctic. My question to the Secretary or the Minister is this: given the limited range of conventionally powered warships, is there a case for, in fact, relocating warships further north within the United Kingdom?
I'm grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for raising that question. First and foremost, I could give some reassurance that not only are we continuing to move our submarines from the south to the north to invest in basing in Scotland for submarine basing, and submarines pose just as a lethal threat to our adversaries as any surface fleet, but also we continue to patrol the High North, only recently in the Barents Sea and indeed earlier in the year, where we returned for the first time since the Cold War, joining with allies from NATO to make sure that those vital trade routes are invested. From my personal point of view, Mr. Speaker, the key place for a ship is at sea doing its job on operations, and the bases, while very, very important, let's remember the way we protect our coast is by being out at sea.
Mary Robinson. Mary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The International Criminal Court's announcement that it is opening an investigation into Israel sets a precedent, potentially opening the door for non-state actors in Afghanistan or Iraq to initiate proceedings against our own armed forces. What steps is my right honourable friend taking to support Israel against this probe and to ensure that democratic states will not be prevented from combating terrorist threats?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right to ask about the actions of the ICC. We, of course, respect the independence of the ICC, but we expect it to exercise due prosecutorial and judicial discipline. We continue to engage with the ICC and international partners to make those points. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Veterans Minister will recall that in Defence Questions in November, I raised the concerns that I have around veterans' mental health. Since then, I've been made aware that demand for services has increased 74% during lockdown. Does he think that the funding that goes into veterans' mental health is enough? And because, of course, waiting times have continued to be longer for veterans, what more can we do to support veterans with mental health difficulties?
So under Op Courage, the new NHS pathway for veterans' mental health, there's an ability to to monitor waiting times in almost real-time data, and I'm absolutely committed to meeting those targets. There is significant investment going into it. I will always argue for more investment into something that has historically been underinvested in for so long, but I'm confident that when we stand here today, we have a world-class offering of mental health provision for our veterans, and it's incumbent on all of us to get that cohort to understand where that help is, to understand what the care pathways are, and to have hope, because you can get better and you will be looked after.
Let's go to Sir David Evanet. Sir David.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How have the emerging military technologies being used in the ongoing conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh impacted my right honourable friend's department assessment of threat ahead of the integrated review?
Mr. Speaker, the recent conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh demonstrated with brutal clarity the devastating impact of UAVs, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance and traditional artillery when combined to produce a lethal cocktail, precision, lethality and range. The destruction of Armenian forces throughout the battlefield, and not just the front line, demonstrated the vulnerability of even armoured forces on the modern battlefield. This includes our own forces, which is not something that, as Defence Secretary, I'm willing to ignore any further, and I'll set out further details in the future review.
Right, let's go to Janet Davey. Janet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State will be well aware of the historic failure of the government to repay the 400 million IMS debt to Iran. My constituent, Nushay Ashori, is just one of the dual nationals in Iran being held as hostage as diplomatic leverage. There is no doubt this debt has caused their detainment. Officials in Iran have confirmed it. What action is the Secretary of State, along with colleagues in the Foreign Office, going to take to resolve this shameful situation with urgency?
The honourable member will know that I held a debate as a backbencher in this House about that very debt and the need and determination to repay it as a stain on Britain's honour from when we dealt with it in the 1970s. That is definitely the intention, that we comply with any court orders that are made against us. We continue to do so, but we have to make sure that whatever we do is within line with both this law and the sanctions law that we have to observe as well.
Mark Menzies. Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The BAE Systems site at Wharton, my constituency, employs over 6,000 people, serving as a source of high-skilled employment and plays a critical role in UK defence capability. With Team Tempest project reaching its critical phase, does my right honourable friend agree that this project must be at the heart of the government's defence plans and must be provided with the backing it needs to give it certainty for the future?
Mr. Speaker, Wharton plays a key role in the UK's combat air sector, and Tempest is the future of that sector, with over 1,800 highly skilled engineers and programmers already involved, going up to 2,500 next year. As the PM has made clear, this government is committed to invest in the future of our combat air strategy.
Catherine McKinnell. Catherine.
North East sends a higher proportion of people into the armed forces than any other region, but also has historically high levels of unemployment. Service charities are concerned that the scope of the Armed Forces Bill is too narrow and doesn't contain specific challenges like employment? And given the challenges faced in transition from service to civilian life, will the government commit to ensuring all areas of potential disadvantage are addressed for North East veterans?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Armed Forces Bill is an important opportunity to enshrine the Armed Forces Covenant into law. I understand for some it goes too far and for some it doesn't go far enough. I would say to my honourable friend, it is the start of the process, it's the start of a conversation to make sure that the experience of being a veteran is levelled up across this country, and I look forward to working with her in the years ahead.
James Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The 100 or so families at Lynham in my constituency who are facing eviction from Annington homes will very much welcome the Minister's remark a moment ago that he's to extend the eviction notice period until next March, and also they'll be glad that they are to enter into negotiations with the Wiltshire Council about it. But is the Minister aware of one further complication, which is that those homes get their utilities from within the base, and Annington homes are so far saying that will preclude them from being sold. Will he instruct officials now to look into what can be done about that particular circumstance?
Mr. Speaker, I hope we may have found a technical solution which would enable base-dependent sites to be dealt with to allow sale to social housing providers if the parties agree. Our advice is that the transfer of supply can generally be effected relatively rapidly. We are willing to share this advice with Annington, who will need to be satisfied that they can perform connections to mains networks safely and efficiently with tenants in situ.
Julian Lewis.
It should be possible to restore the pensions of a small cohort of war widows who lost them on remarriage or cohabitation without setting a precedent that would open the floodgates in other respects for other cohorts. So what progress is the department making in addressing this debt of honour?
I would say to my honourable friend that I am aligned with his views. The Secretary of State has worked tirelessly on this issue to try and correct this historic injustice of war widows' pensions. We will arrive at a solution, and we continue to examine all possibilities, including the ex gratia scheme and all the other ideas my honourable friend has come up with in his tireless campaigning. Like I said, the Secretary of State is committed to resolving this, and we will get there in the end.
Kevin Jones, final question.
Thank you, Speaker. The government maintain that every F-35 which is built has 15% UK content. But I understand that the MOD's definition of content includes work carried out by UK companies by US subsidiaries. So therefore, can I ask the Minister to publish how he defines UK content in this programme, particularly so we can decide what is actually done in the UK and what is done in the US?
I've received a large number of parliamentary questions from the honourable gentleman, which I believe I've answered that question as part of them. If not, I will make certain that it is clear to him, but it is 15% by value. We're very proud of the contributions being made by UK manufacturing to the F-35. But I will make certain that that is covered again.
Point of order, Shadow Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On a point of order, the Ministerial Code is clear, and I quote, "When Parliament is in session, the most important announcements of government policy should be made in the first instance in Parliament." I know, Mr. Speaker, this is a principle that you believe is fundamental to the proper role of Parliament and accountability of ministers. Mr. Speaker, we look forward to the Prime Minister's statement tomorrow on the integrated review, yet over the last week there have been a series of detailed media briefings about decisions in that integrated review. And with the Defence Secretary in his place, can you offer guidance to the House, Mr. Speaker, ahead of the follow-up command paper on Monday and the Defence Industrial Strategy on Tuesday, so that we do not have the same serious disregard of the Ministerial Code and disrespect of Parliament?
Further to that point of order. Okay.
Have indeed seen a steady drumbeat of media stories promoting radical changes to our defence posture, but the Defence Select Committee also has not received any of these briefings, despite frequent requests from the department. What troubles me the most, Mr. Speaker, is the MOD's decision to share with the media the desire to increase our nuclear stockpile with the purchase of 200 W93 US-made warheads. I'm a firm supporter of CASD, Mr. Speaker, but changes to our non-proliferation policy deserve proper oversight in this House and not used as a sweetener to overshadow dramatic cuts to our conventional defence posture. Could I ask for your guidance on how we can encourage the MOD to brief the Defence Select Committee, perhaps in Lady Bird book form, as the Defence Secretary likes to promote, and also to make sure that any announcements on CASD are made in this chamber first?
Right. Can I say I'm grateful to both right honourable gentlemen for giving me notice of the points of order. Erskine May states that the Speaker has made it clear that media should not be informed about the content of statements before they've been made to this House. When a statement is made, members will of course have an opportunity to ask about any advance briefing given to the media. But my position is clear. I want important policy announcements to be made first to this House. Ministers on the Treasury bench will have heard the right honourable gentleman's comments and response, and the same with the chair of the Select Committee. I expect that response will be shared with all ministers and they will act accordingly. Thank you. I am now going to suspend the House for 3 minutes to enable the necessary arrangements to be made. Order. Order! Before we come to the statement by the Home Secretary, I need to inform the House that because of charges have now been brought in the Sarah Everard case, legal proceedings are now active for the purposes of the House sub judice resolution. That means that reference should not be made to the case, including any details of those against whom charges have been brought. It is, however, in order to discuss, for example, the relationship between the COVID-19 regulations and the right to protest. I now call the Home Secretary. Priti Patel.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a statement on the tragic death of Sarah Everard and the events of Saturday evening. I would like to begin by saying that my thoughts and prayers are with Sarah's family and friends at this unbearable time. And I know that every member of this House will join me in offering her loved ones our deepest sympathies. While this is a horrific case, which has rightly prompted debate and questions around wider issues, we must remember that a young woman has lost her life and that a family is grieving. Mr. Speaker, let me turn to this weekend's events. I have already said that some of the footage circulating online of Clapham Common is upsetting. So whilst the police are rightly operationally independent, I asked the Metropolitan Police for a report into what had happened. This government backs our police in fighting crime and keeping the public safe. But in the interest of providing greater assurance and ensuring public confidence, I have asked Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary to conduct a full independent lessons learned review. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner has welcomed this, and I will await the report and of course update the House in due course. Mr. Speaker, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge why Sarah's death has upset so many. My heartache and that of others can be summed up in just 5 words. She was just walking home. And while the specific circumstances of Sarah's disappearance are thankfully uncommon, what has happened has reminded women everywhere of the steps that we take each day without a second thought to keep ourselves safe. It has rightly ignited anger at the danger posed to women by predatory men, an anger I feel as strongly as anyone. And accounts shared online in the wake of Sarah's disappearance are so powerful because every single one of us can relate to them. Too many of us have walked home from school or work alone, only to hear footsteps uncomfortably close behind us. Too many of us have pretended to be on the phone to a friend to scare someone off. Too many of us have clutched our keys in our fists in case we need to defend ourselves. And that is not okay. Women and girls must feel safe whilst walking our streets. That is why we have continued to take action. Our landmark domestic abuse bill is on track to receive royal assent by the end of April, and this will transform our collective response to this abhorrent crime. This builds on other measures we have brought forward, including the controlling or coercive behaviour offence and the domestic violence disclosure scheme, known as Clare's Law, which enables individuals to ask the police whether their partner has a violent or abusive past. We have also introduced new preventative tools and powers to tackle crimes including stalking, female genital mutilation, and so-called upskirting. But we can never be complacent, which is why throughout the passage of the Domestic Abuse Bill, we have accepted amendments from honourable members from political parties across this House. The bill now includes new offences of non-fatal strangulation, outlaws threats to disclose intimate images, and extends the controlling or coercive behaviour offence to cover post-separation abuse. This is in addition to the bill's existing measures, which include a new statutory definition of domestic abuse that recognises the many forms abuse can take. That's psychological, physical, emotional, economic, sexual, and of course the impact of abuse on children, as well as the new rules to prevent victims having to go through the pain of being cross-examined by their abusers in family and in civil courts. We all know action is needed to improve the outcomes for rape cases, and we are currently developing robust actions as part of our end-to-end review of rape to reverse the declining outcomes in recent years. And Mr. Speaker, at the end of last year in December, I launched the first ever public survey of women and girls to hear their views on how we can better tackle these gendered crimes. On Friday, in the wake of the outpouring of grief, I reopened that survey. I can tell the House that as of 11 a.m. today, the Home Office has received 78,000 responses since 6 p.m. on Friday. That is completely unprecedented and considerably more than the 18,000 responses received over the entire 10-week period when the survey was previously open. I'm listening to women and girls up and down the country, and their views will help to shape a new strategy on tackling violence against women and girls, which I will bring forward to this House later this year. The Police, Crime, Sentencing and Courts Bill, which we will, Mr. Speaker, shortly be debating, will end the halfway release of those convicted for sexual offences such as rape. Instead, under our law, vile criminals responsible for these terrible crimes will spend at least 2/3 of their time behind bars. Our new law will extend the scope of the Sexual Offences Act 2003 with regards to the abuse of positions of trust, something which predominantly affects young girls. And it will introduce K's Law, which will encourage the police to impose pre-charge bail with appropriate conditions where necessary and proportionate to do so, which we hope will provide reassurance and additional protection for alleged victims in high-harm cases like domestic abuse. I note the opposition will today be voting against these crucial measures, against measures to support victims of violent crimes, including young women and girls. Finally, Mr. Speaker, The government is providing an extra £40 million to help victims during the pandemic and beyond. And last month, we launched a new government advertising campaign, #ItStillMatters, to raise awareness of sexual violence services and ensure victims know where to get help. Mr. Speaker, I want to end by saying that over the past year, during the coronavirus pandemic, the police have been faced with an unenviable and immediately difficult task. It is one, for most part, that they have approached with skill and professionalism, helping to enforce regulations as determined by Parliament with one crucial objective in mind: to save lives. This House approved those changes by 524 votes to 16 on the 6th of January this year. Sadly, as of Sunday the 14th of March, more than 125,500 lives have been lost to this horrible virus. It is for that reason that I continue to urge everyone, for as long as these regulations are in place, not to participate in large gatherings or attend protests. The right to protest is the cornerstone of our democracy, but the government's duty remains to prevent more lives being lost during this pandemic. Finally, Mr. Speaker, there will undoubtedly be more discussions of these vitally important issues in the days and weeks to come. But we cannot forget and must not forget that a family is grieving. And I know the thoughts and prayers of this whole House are with Sarah's loved ones at this truly terrible time.
We now come to Shadow Home Secretary Nick Thomas-Simmons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Home Secretary for coming to the House today to make a statement and for advance sight of it. We come together at a time of national grief and what must now be a time of change. The news of Sarah Everard's death is heartbreaking for us all, and our thoughts are with her family and friends. And whilst I of course appreciate the legal sensitivity of the case, reports around its circumstances are extremely distressing. The reaction to Sarah Everard's death across the country has been extraordinarily powerful and moving, led by the passionate voices of women and girls who are rightly demanding action and change. And it cannot be right that so many women continue to fear for their safety on a daily basis, whether on the streets or at home. The testimonies that have been shared highlight the unacceptable levels of abuse and misogyny, harassment on the streets, walking home with headphones turned off to listen for threats, keys between fingers, being told to stay home after dark to avoid attackers. But let me be clear, it is not women who should change their behaviour, it is men and wider society that needs to change. And at times like this, it is vital people are able to have their voices heard, of course in a way that is lawful and COVID secure. Yet this weekend in Clapham, things clearly went very wrong. And I share the anger about the policing and the scenes we saw. It's right that the Mayor of London has shown leadership by calling on Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and the Independent Office for Police Conduct to investigate. The Home Secretary asked for a report from the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, and I hope she will publish it because transparency is so important. Can the Home Secretary also publish the minutes of the advance meeting that were held on Friday, mentioned by the Policing Minister on the media this morning? And can she confirm what communication she personally had with the Metropolitan Police prior to the events on Saturday? And whilst the event was a vigil, not a protest, the scenes from Clapham should be a red warning light to the government that ministers should not be rushing through laws cracking down on protest. The truth is, Mr. Speaker, this government is failing to address violence against women and girls, and ministers even want to curtail their right to protest about it. It is a chronic failure from this government. And meetings and reopening surveys alone are nowhere near enough. And meetings, we understand, that the Women and Equalities Minister won't even be attending this evening. Figures from the Office for National Statistics show that recorded rapes doubled between 2014 and 2019, doubled. The crime survey for England and Wales showed that over 2 million people experienced domestic abuse in a year, yet only a tiny fraction are charged, and charging rates are falling. The justice system sends a perverse message that murdering someone at home, which predominantly means men killing women, is a lesser crime than killing someone in the street by handing out shorter sentences for domestic homicides. The 296-page bill we will consider later today contains the word memorial 8 times and fails to include the word women once. The government's message is they want to lock up people who damage the statues of slave traders for 10 years when rape sentences start at half that. And I say to the government today, unless this changes, unless there's action on homicide, unless there's action on street harassment, unless there's action on stalking, this bill will risk becoming an abuser's charter that just allows violence and injustice in our streets and in our homes to continue unchecked. Ministers have been on the airwaves today, struggling to find aspects of the bill that will make a difference to addressing violence against women and girls. And let me just take one example. Ministers have pointed to whole life tariffs for rape. Now, I would ask the Home Secretary, when she gets to her feet, to answer how many rape convictions have resulted in life terms. Because the answer is hardly any. Today, the High Court ruled in favour of the status quo on rape. And it is a status quo that is shameful, and the government must change. The figures show that 99% of rapes reported to the police in England and Wales result in no legal proceedings whatsoever. 99%. It's effectively a get out of jail free card, and it is appalling. It doesn't have to be this way. This could be a time of national unity when we decide to come together as a country to put forward protections. The government can either change course, take necessary action, or ministers will find themselves on the wrong side of history once again.
Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Honourable Gentleman for his comments, but if I may, Mr. Speaker, at a time when the country is mourning a significant loss, and there are moments of great unity, I'm quite sorry to hear the tone of the Honourable Gentleman, particularly in terms of the government's record when it comes to and our commitment of tackling violence against women and girls. And the Right Honourable Gentleman will also be well cited, more than aware, of the significant contributions of all members of this House to the Domestic Abuse Bill, which has been under debate, scrutiny, challenge, amendment for a considerable period of time, in fact. And it is in the House of Lords, the other place right now. But I would like to emphasise, Mr. Speaker, that this government is committed when it comes to violence against women and girls at the highest level. And when you look at, in fact, the work of this government over the last decade, and if I may, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to pay tribute to my right honourable friend, the member for Maidenhead, for all her work in particular, because she was the one that really set the bar high in legislation from all the measures, not just in terms of the DA bill, but FGM, violence against women and girls, everything that has been put forward in terms of money, support for charities. This government is building upon that, and no one can ignore that simple fact. The Right Honourable Gentleman has also made some specific references to the bill that will be debated this afternoon, in particular as well to rape and rape convictions. The bill is a criminal justice bill, as well as a policing bill, and he will also be very mindful of the work that this government is undertaking right now with regard to the end-to-end rape review, to completely reverse the decline in outcomes that we have seen in recent years. This government is increasingly and very honest up front about the decline in outcomes that we have seen. We are working with all the relevant parties, including the CPS. We want to change the way of direction there, and there is much more work to come, and that will be published in due course, shortly in fact. But to say that the bill itself does nothing for women is completely wrong, primarily when it comes to sentencing, because it'll end the halfway release of those convicted for sexual offences such as rape. Instead, our laws will go after those vile criminals, and they will spend at least 2/3 of their times behind bars. And Mr. Speaker, I think it's worth reflecting that it was in 2003 under a Labour government that made automatic halfway release mandatory for all standard determinant sentences, regardless of whether the offender had been convicted of a violent or sexual offence. And the bill discussion that will be debated later on will reverse that policy. The Honourable Gentleman, the Right Honourable Gentleman, also says that there's no mention of women in the bill specifically. That's another accusation that I will reject, primarily because it's a criminal law and sentencing bill which applies equally to everybody. And the party opposite will also know that in line with the Serious Organised Crime and Police Act Bill in 2005, the Criminal Justice Act in 2003, neither of those bills, which related to criminal justice and sentencing, mentioned women as well. Now, of course, there are many other measures that we will discuss through the passage later on of this bill. But I do, Mr. Speaker, want to come back to the statement, the points that I have made in particular. It is right when it comes to the Metropolitan Police. I have had many discussions with them on Friday, over the weekend, with the Commissioner specifically, in relation to preparations and planning prior to Saturday evening. My comments are public, they're on the record in terms of what has happened, and quite frankly, the upsetting images that were out on Saturday evening. We have a review that's now being conducted by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary. It is right that takes place. I also think, Mr. Speaker, no one should prejudge anything in terms of, conduct until we absolutely see what has happened in terms of that report. The police are rightly operationally independent. But I do just want to conclude by saying that, of course, all of us in this House, this isn't just about the government, all of us want to work to drive the right outcome so that women feel safe. Laws and legislation will absolutely do that. There's no question about that. But there is something also about behaviour and culture. That's culture across society, that's culture with men as well, and we should be upfront about that, never shy away from being honest and discussing that. But right now, I think this House should all have in their thoughts and in their prayer Sarah's families and friends at this particularly unbearable time.
To Right Honourable Theresa May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my Right Honourable friend for her remarks. And she is right to remind us that behind the events of Saturday lies the tragic death of Sarah Everard, a bright young woman dearly loved by her family and friends. And I join my Right Honourable friend and other members of this House in saying that my thoughts and prayers are with Sarah's family and friends at this time. We want justice for Sarah. We also want women to be able to feel and be safe on our streets and in their homes. So does my Right Honourable friend agree that we must redouble our efforts to make sure that the government's excellent domestic abuse bill reaches the statute book as anticipated next month, but also recognise that legislation is not enough, and that if we are going to eradicate violence against women and girls, we need a change of attitudes, and that is about dealing with perpetrators, changing their behaviour, but also teaching young men and boys about respect for women and about what is or is not acceptable in a relationship.
I would just like to very much pay tribute to my Right Honourable friend for her comments and her work and leadership, no question, around domestic abuse but violence against women and girls. And she is absolutely right in terms of the fact that the domestic abuse bill is a landmark bill. It is a landmark piece of legislation that I think actually all honourable members of this House should feel proud of in the work that has come together across this House. But also, my Right Honourable friend is absolutely right in terms of the cultural and behavioural aspects that must be changed. And, for all of us have to be conscious of that. As a mother bringing up a young son, absolutely respecting women and girls and treating everyone fairly and rightly with equality and understanding that there are no barriers and demonstrating that respect to one another and importantly tolerance to one another as well is absolutely vital. There is so much more work to do. Legislation can only go so far. We can never, ever be complacent. But with that as well, as a government, and I think this Parliament, this House, across both houses, will absolutely share the determination and the desire to do so much more when it comes to protecting girls and women, but also in our strategies where we must all be united. This isn't about just saying, there's a survey taking place. We must all contribute to that. And in fact, now the survey has been reopened, I very much hope that members of the party opposite will actually contribute to that, to help us have a united and coherent approach, one voice approach, in fact, to how we can support and support women and girls, but prevent violence against women and girls too.
Let's go to SNP spokesperson Angela Crawley. Angela.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The murder of Sarah Everard has truly shocked and saddened us all. Can I join the others in sending our heartfelt condolences to Sarah's family and friends at this time? She was walking home, a sentence that resonates with all women. This tragedy serves as a stark reminder to women who assess every aspect of their daily lives in fear of sexual violence, assault, or abhorrent crimes inflicted at the hands of men. Can I once more take this opportunity to urge the PM to ratify the Istanbul Convention without further delay? Across the UK this weekend, women reclaimed the streets in protest and to pay tribute to the life of Sarah Everard. Police responding have received widespread criticism, and the questions must be answered as to whether the actions were necessary and proportionate to protect and prevent public harm. The public health crisis has made restrictions necessary and the public gatherings unadvisable, so while the police face difficult decisions every day, it's impossible to watch the footage of the events at Clapham Commons without shock and concern that the policing appeared heavy-handed and disproportionate. Therefore, it is right that the Chief Inspector of the Constabulary has been asked to conduct a review. In Scotland, this incident would have been examined by the Independent Advisory Group, experts with a specific remit to ensure the use of powers is consistent with human rights, principles and legislation. Turning to the police sentencing and court bill, the right of protest must remain a fundamental human right. Can I therefore ask the Secretary of State to confirm that the remit of the Chief Inspector's review will focus on human rights as well as policing matters?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her remarks and also her sentiment on the tragic death of Sarah Everard. I think there are a number of points that if I may just come back on to. I mean, the Honourable Lady is absolutely right in terms of the role of the Inspectorate, and we will wait for that review, and obviously I will report back. And I think it's worth just reflecting, Mr. Speaker, once again that this has been a difficult and demanding period for the police. The impact of coronavirus restrictions, and we know why they are in place as well. And on the point of protest, Mr. Speaker, I'm very, very conscious that we will have the debate later on this afternoon as well. This government absolutely supports the freedom of expression, and clearly when it comes to the whole issue of the right to protest, that's fundamental to our democratic freedoms. Without wanting to prejudge the debate or prejudge the further discussions on the bill, the legislation will, of course, speak about the police using powers in terms of how they would manage protests. But it's also worth reflecting that this will be updating legislation, the Public Order Act of 1986, which was enacted over 30 years ago. And so this will be very much part of the discussion that we will be having in due course.
Let's go to Deanna Davison. Deanna.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I join my right honourable friend and voices right across the House in paying my deepest condolences to Sarah Everard's family and loved ones. It's a truly heartbreaking situation that I know has allowed many women to find the strength to share their own experiences. And I was really moved to hear that 78,000 people have now responded to the reopened consultation, and I'm encouraging many others to do the same and share their voice. But does my right honourable friend agree with me that if we really want to get the best outcome and make our streets feel safer for everyone, that we have to listen to all voices, both men and women, people of all political persuasions, to ensure that we're truly working together to deliver the change that we need?
Secretary.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for her comments and her questions actually as well. She's of course absolutely right, and you know, this is a collective effort for everyone to be part of shaping future strategy, shaping future policy and legislation. And we can do that together, which is why, Mr. Speaker, it is quite unprecedented and incredible that 78,000 people have responded to the survey. That is something we are really pleased about, because we do want to encourage people to contribute. And I would also encourage, as you've already heard me say, Mr. Speaker, all members of this House to play their role and actually join that contribution.
To the Select Committee of Acting.
Mr. Speaker, can I join with the expressions from across the House of deep sympathy and condolences to Sarah Everard's family. Following her tragic death, women across the country have been moved to talk about the experiences that we all share and that no one should have to endure, of feeling threatened and unsafe on our own streets. 8 months ago, I put forward measures to deal with repeat perpetrators of abuse and stalking, to be able to register them, to be able to prevent the problem where they move from one victim to another, no one keeps track, and they get away with it. At that time, ministers said those measures weren't needed. Has she looked at this again, and will she work with me and Baroness Royal and Paladin to make sure we can bring in these strong measures and take action against repeat perpetrators and keep more women safe?
The Right Honourable Lady is absolutely right about the points that she has been raising and the measures at large. There is something about perpetrators and their serial offending that has to be addressed. There is no question about that at all. And of course, this does link predominantly to many of the criminal justice outcomes and the wider debate that this House will be having, not just later on today, but over future weeks as well. I will be very candid. We will look at all measures, and rightly so. We should be doing everything possible to keep women safe, but actually keeping everyone safe. And the behaviour of serial perpetrators, serial offenders, is deeply corrosive, deeply damaging, and obviously with dreadful implications and consequences. So we'd be very happy to continue, not just to look at these measures, but I think it's fair to say right now, obviously with the violence against women and girls consultation that is underway, we will continue to engage with others and follow up on these points.
Let's go to Philip Davis. Philip Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's clearly unacceptable for any woman to feel unsafe walking the streets. Can I propose some practical measures that the Home Secretary might adopt? Can she introduce a fund to roll out much more CCTV around the country, which will help to make our streets safer for people and bring evidence where there's a crime committed? Can she stop taking people off the DNA database? There are huge numbers of crimes, sexual assaults, rapes and murders, where there's DNA evidence available but no match. And the more people on the DNA database, the more chance of getting these people off our streets and rightly convicted. Can we increase the sentences for people convicted of sexual assaults and rapes? And can we stop the early release, the automatic early release of criminals who still are considered a threat to society? These measures would actually help make our streets safer for everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank my honourable friend for his comments and his practical suggestions. We are doing a lot on CCTV, and we do have the Safer Streets Fund, which my honourable friend will be very, very aware of. And of course, he's raised a number of areas which I suspect if he were to join the Bill Committee of the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill, he could absolutely contribute to and make those points there.
Ribeiro Addy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm join members in continuing to extend our thoughts and prayers to Sarah Everard's family. My constituents have reacted with justified anger to the Metropolitan Police's treatment of those in attendance at this weekend's vigil to commemorate Sarah and all women who lost their lives to gender-based violence. It's bitterly ironic that an event intended to highlight the issue of public safety for women was blocked on the grounds of public safety. What happened this weekend is a reminder of what happens when police try to completely bypass the views of the communities they serve. So does the Home Secretary recognise that the police's high-handed approach got the balance between public safety and the right to protest completely wrong? Does the Home Secretary agree that the police's heavy-handed treatment of female protesters was wrong, and will the Home Secretary now accept her policing, crime and sentencing and courts bill is ill-conceived? My constituents are very angry about what has happened and want to know what the government will do to reassure them that they will proactively address violence against women and girls and deep-seated forms of institutional discrimination in the UK police.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I understand the sentiment that the Honourable Lady is raising on behalf of her constituents, and obviously recognise the constituency that she represents and the terrible, tragic events that have happened and taken place. All our thoughts are clearly with Sarah Everard and her family, and of course, the vigil that was planned, the police themselves, the Metropolitan Police, had been involved and spent a great deal of time with the organisers, and the Metropolitan Police have been very public about that. I'm not going to repeat my comments about seeking greater assurance and ensuring public confidence in policing, hence the reason why Her Majesty's Inspectorate are now conducting a full independent lessons learned review. I think that is absolutely appropriate. My comments about Saturday evening are on the record and well known. With regards to the police, crime, sentencing and courts bill, which the Honourable Lady has referred to, that is a manifesto bill that this government was elected on, and we will, of course, participate in second reading later on this afternoon. It is not ill-conceived at all. The British public voted for it. We live in a democracy, and this government will work to deliver on that.
Let's go to Pauline Latham. Pauline.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the announced in-depth review into the criminal justice system when it comes to rape and sexual assault? Does my right honourable friend agree that every part of the criminal justice system has to play its role in bringing perpetrators to justice and better supporting victims? There's a lot of rape happens within marriage, and it's not the best situation when people have been married under the age of 18 to a man who is much older. So could my right honourable friend also look at that to see how we can stop that sort of situation arising?
My friend is absolutely right, and I just would like to pay tribute to her for her work and campaigning on this particular issue. And of course, she's absolutely right that this is about the criminal justice system from an end-to-end perspective, so from policing right through not just to charging, but actually conviction as well. And that is effectively what the police bill is about, the police, crime, sentencing and courts bill, which is why it goes across two departments. But the rape review itself is fundamentally important because obviously the numbers have not been going in the right direction. We have to understand the lessons as to why charging decisions have been, how they are. Also the impact on witnesses and victims themselves, victims and the attrition that takes place when it comes to them even going to court. So there is a lot of work that's taking place in this area. I should also just mention in dispatches, the Prime Minister leads the Crime and Justice Task Force, where this is one of those fundamental issues, again, across government, not just Home Office, but across the MOJ, where we are bringing these core elements together with the DPP, working with the CPS, working with the AG. These issues are absolutely integral to the entire system.
Let's go to Ed Davey. Ed Davey.
Can I send my condolences and thoughts to the family and friends of Sarah Everard at this most difficult of times? Mr. Speaker, the scenes of women being forced to the ground, restrained and arrested simply for holding a peaceful vigil in memory of Sarah Everard and in condemnation of violence against women and girls were utterly disgraceful. Of course, the Met Commissioner Cressida Dick must resign, but can I ask the Home Secretary what personal responsibility she herself has for the terrible handling of this peaceful vigil? Did the Home Secretary speak to the Met Commissioner in the run-up to the vigil? If so, will she tell the House now what guidance and advice she gave the Met Police in advance of the vigil?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Gentleman is right in the sense that those scenes were distressing and upsetting. There is no question about that at all. And I've already spoken about the measures that are now in place in terms of getting assurance in the way in which the Metropolitan Police conducted, obviously, their operations. They are rightly operationally independent, and there is obviously now the lessons learned independent review taking place. I had been in touch with the Metropolitan Police Commissioner on Friday and throughout the weekend, and we have had extensive discussions in terms of planning, preparation for the vigil at the weekend. I should, however, Mr. Speaker, emphasise that on Friday there was legal action underway. So until that legal action had been determined, and of course the Metropolitan Police, the Commissioner and the Met Police themselves were engaging with the organisers of the vigil, there were various plans that the police were working on. I will be very clear, though. On Friday, my views were known, and they were based on the fact that people who wanted to pay tribute, obviously within the locality, bear in mind we are in a pandemic, we cannot forget that, we are in a health pandemic, that people who live locally, clearly who were either out, on a daily basis, passing through, laying flowers is absolutely the right thing to do, and we saw many people doing that. But of course, as I've said, those scenes on Saturday evening were upsetting. That is the reason why I asked for the Metropolitan Police Commissioner to provide a report on the event itself, what happened, and now why we have a lessons learned review into the operational effect and impact in terms of what happened.
Let's go to Stephen Hammond. Stephen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like colleagues across the House, my condolences are with Sarah Everard's family and friends. All women should feel safe, and no offender should think they can abuse women on the streets or anywhere else. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that all reports of allegations of abuse must be seriously and more rigorously investigated, and that there must be confidence in the justice system that it will do this and that it will support victims? Could she confirm that the Violence Against Women and Girls consultation strategy, she intends that there will be that confidence in the justice system after the consultation?
My right honourable friend is absolutely right. Much of what we are discussing right now, Mr. Speaker, speaks to greater assurance and public confidence in the criminal justice system. And of course, members have touched on already as well in policing and the events on Saturday evening. It is it's vitally important that through the VAW consultation, the development of the strategy, we look at this not in an isolated way. This has to be end-to-end in terms of the entire system. So right down to the types of abuse and harassment that girls and women are experiencing, understanding the root causes and the behavioural factors as to why perpetrators and individuals are behaving in a particular way, why abuse is taking place, right down to how we as a country and as a government tackle those issues as well. So that does impinge upon the criminal justice system, and of course all our work is based on driving better outcomes, but the right outcomes, and where criminality takes place, ensuring that the perpetrators of crimes are receiving the tough sentences that they deserve.
Let's go to Caroline Lucas. Caroline.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I join others in extending my condolences to Sarah Everard's family and to the family of Biba Henry, Nicole Smallman, and countless others who have lost their lives because of male violence. Now, I acknowledge the particular policing challenges at a time of COVID restrictions, but the Met is still obliged to follow the Human Rights Act and execute its powers proportionately and only when necessary. And it's clear to everyone that they got it terribly wrong on Saturday night. Does she therefore not see that handing over yet more draconian powers to the police when they have so badly misjudged this situation would be both foolish and dangerous? And that a bill which criminalises protests which are noisy and have impact effectively means cancelling this country's long-standing right to peaceful protest altogether? And finally, will she stand in solidarity with women arrested over the weekend and call for the withdrawal of any fixed penalty notices that were issued because of the Met's disproportionate response?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I won't go over my comments about the police on Saturday evening. I think those points have been made. I absolutely, if I may, disagree, and we will discuss this at a later stage, obviously, through the police bill later on this afternoon. But the fact of the matter is, as a country, we absolutely believe in freedom of expression and the rights of people, free speech, and for individuals to express themselves freely through protest as well, manage protests in the right way. And the police always engage with individuals and organisers. We will debate this during the course of the bill, Mr. Speaker, but I'm afraid I think the Honourable Lady has completely misrepresented the proposals that we are putting forward.
Sir Ian Duncan-Smith.
Mr. Speaker, the murder of Sarah Everard was a shocking event, and I feel terribly sorry for the family and they've gone through, made even edgier really by the fact that there's now been charges levelled against a police officer. We require police officers to protect everybody, particularly women as well. However, I've received a note from a police...
Order. Can I just remind the gentleman we shouldn't be talking about the suspect at this stage?
My apologies, Mr. Speaker, I wasn't going to refer to you other than just in passing. The reality, though, that my right honourable friend has announced that she is having an inquiry into what happened in those terrible events on Saturday night, and they were shameful, but it ill behoves politicians to get up, pass judgment on what happened without all the evidence. I was contacted by a female police officer today to tell me of what happened to her on that night. She was threatened. She was told that she should have been murdered, not Sarah Everard, and that she was manhandled. I simply say, on all sides, we should be dialing this down, not trying to raise the temperature by calling for resignations, etc.
Well, can I just thank my right honourable friend for his remarks, his comment, and the point that he makes. And it's a well-made point, if I may say so. I too, Mr. Speaker, have been written to by many police officers, expressing very similar sentiments as well from their own experiences. And I think the point about not prejudging is absolutely right. The police have operational independence. Obviously, as Home Secretary, I have called for a report. I've received a report, but there is now an independent review. And it's right that we have that review, yes, for assurance purposes, but also to strengthen public confidence in policing, and obviously for all members of this House as well, to, in due course, hear the full facts as to what happened.
Let's go to Liz Saville-Roberts. Liz.
Diolch yn fawr, Lefarydd, and I would like to take this opportunity to extend my personal fat sympathy for the family and friends of Sarah Everard at this horrific time. In June 2020, I proposed a domestic abuse register for the early identification of abusive men as a means of preventing death and injury. The Minister for Safeguarding rejected this, claiming that current systems for preventing violence against women were adequate. The National Police Chiefs Council also objected on the grounds of costs and their capacity to manage such a register. I sense that the government now recognises that the current system is failing women and that a properly funded, staffed and supported register for serial stalkers and domestic violence perpetrators is urgently needed. How will the Home Secretary make sure that such new proposals and funding properly account for the different legislative landscape in Wales so that women in Wales aren't excluded from future protections, which I hope are on their way?
Home Secretary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think this is an important moment, actually, for this House and for all colleagues when it comes to domestic abuse bill measures, which have been extensively debated in this House. It is vital, of course, and the Right Honourable Lady has clearly spoken about Wales and the authority and the responsibilities there. We are absolutely working across the devolved administrations because we want consistency in the approach. It's right that we all work together to support women, and the domestic abuse bill will do that, absolutely do that. And my honourable friend, the Safeguarding Minister, has worked extensively with all colleagues in the House on the issue that the Honourable Lady has raised. But the fact of the matter is we want this bill to receive royal assent. It should do very soon. We need it to happen to safeguard more and more women and give the protection that they desperately need from their abusers.
Chris Loader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I went to Clapham Common Bandstand yesterday evening to pay my own respects, and I, like members from across this House, send my greatest sympathies and sadnesses to Sarah's family. Mr. Speaker, I believe that it is highly regrettable that members of the opposition demand that the first female Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police resign in this situation. May I ask my right honourable friend, What is she doing to ensure that the facts are understood properly before premature conclusions are made on people's actions? Thank you.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question and also for the sentiment that he has shared with the House this afternoon. I agree entirely with his comments. And alongside that, of course, he has asked what am I doing by commissioning the Inspectorate of Constabulary. It is important that we have the full facts, in addition to supplement the lessons learned review. And I come back to the point, Mr. Speaker, I would really strongly recommend that colleagues do not prejudge. The images were upsetting, of course they were upsetting, but alongside that, it is right that we see the full report in due course and we hear the facts as they come out.
We now come to Ian Paisley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I too add my voice and condolences to the family of Ms Everard and her family and friends and all those who have been affected by this most hellish and tragic murders. Turning to the events that we saw in Clapham Common on Saturday evening, Mr. Speaker, members I think are entitled to ask the question, however, what on earth were the Metropolitan Police thinking? What on earth happened to police discretion? What on earth happened to proportionality, to flexibility, to empathy, to any sense of self-awareness, given the circumstances that surrounded that hellish murder? Every ingredient of good policing, in my view and in the views of many of my constituents, appeared to be completely absent from the policing activity on Clapham Common. The defining image that will stick in the collective mind of Britain will be Patsy Stevenson being almost sat upon by 3 police officers whilst being detained. I must say, Madam Deputy Speaker, if I saw one of my adult daughters treated that way, I would find it impossible to contain my anger in terms of what happened. Can I ask the Home Secretary, therefore, how quickly will this report be made available? How expeditiously can the Home Secretary act to rectify what is an appalling wrong?
Home Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The honourable gentleman's comments are very strong, but in response to his question, he knows, the House knows, I've commissioned now the Inspectorate of Constabulary for the report. I have asked for the report to conclude in the next fortnight, which we will then obviously then update the House in terms of findings and recommendations. I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's worth just reflecting though in terms of what happened on Saturday. For approximately 8 hours, there was peace around the bandstand. People were respectfully, paying their respects, laying flowers, grieving, showing support and empathy in a way in which, every individual would want to in terms of offering their sympathies and condolences. That is why we need to look at the review to see effectively what happened operationally. And then, of course, if lessons need to be learned, they will be post the report.
Sarah Dye.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I offer also my condolences to the friends and family of Sarah Everard. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that it's frankly absurd to hear this afternoon that the party opposite is actually opposing the provisions of the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill that wants to increase sentences for rapists? There's a dichotomy there which is a bit absurd, is it not?
Secretary.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and to be very frank, Madam Deputy Speaker, I was quite surprised when I did hear that was the position that the party opposite were taking place. This is a criminal justice bill. It will increase sentences for individuals, perpetrators that perpetrate the most horrendous, appalling sexual offences and crimes against women, children, citizens. And of course, it is an important bill, as I've said already, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's key to our manifesto. British public voted for it. This government and our party in government as well are absolutely determined to strengthen our laws and the criminal justice system so that we can put away those individuals that cause harm to individuals and increase sentences.
We now go to Diane Abbott.
Our thoughts and prayers are with Sarah Everard
family. And the Home Secretary will be aware that the whole nation was upset by the images of women who had come to a peaceful vigil about violence to women and who found themselves wrestled to the ground and handcuffed by police officers. Is the Home Secretary aware that the Metropolitan Police's statement, which sought to justify what happened on Saturday by talking about, and I quote, the overriding need to protect people's safety, but issue where some people are puzzled with the idea that you can make people safe by manhandling them and handcuffing them. In relation to the policing bill, which the House will be debating later, she herself has made it clear that this bill is expressly designed to crack down on peaceful protests by groups like Extinction Rebellion and Black Lives Matter. She described Black Lives Matter peaceful process as dreadful. Can she understand why many people in this country believe that giving the police even more powers to crack down on peaceful protests can only lead to more scenes like the distressing scenes that the nation witnessed on Saturday at the vigil on Clapham Common?
Home Secretary. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With respect to the Right Honourable Lady, with regards, first of all, to the events on Saturday evening, I would urge the Honourable Lady not to be so judgmental until we actually see the report that comes from the Inspector of Constabulary. The Honourable Lady, Right Honourable Lady, will have plenty of opportunity to discuss protest and police powers through the passage of the bill. But I would just like to say this. In recent years, we have seen a significant change in protest tactics, which have led to disruption, which have also led to violence and people's lives being endangered. So I look forward to the debate with the Honourable Lady on this particular point later on, but she's absolutely wrong in her characterisation of the measures that we are introducing.
Before I call the next speaker, could I just say that I'm very keen to make sure we get everybody in this important statement. So if I could ask colleagues to be fairly brief with their questions and obviously the answers as well. So Graham Brady.
I'll try my best, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Home Secretary has rightly said that the right to protest is a cornerstone of our democracy. But as she also said, this House on the 6th of January voted swingeing powers to control protests for the period of the coronavirus restrictions. Can I ask her to work with concerned members across the House to make sure that the legislation that we're about to pass protects that right of peaceful protest and only stops serious disruption?
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right, and I thank him for his question. I will continue to always engage with colleagues, all colleagues, on this. It's a really important point. And I know how hard it has been for many colleagues in this House, looking at the regulations, the implications of those regulations, and the restrictions that they have brought in. And of course, this will also be subject to debate in the House going forward.
Harriet Harman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I would like to pay my deepest sympathy in respects to the family of Sarah Everard and her many dismayed and grieving friends. I welcome the reopening of the Violence Against Women and Girls Statement survey, consultation. It's evident that the Home Secretary recognises the genuine and justified strength of feeling about women's safety that lay behind the vigil on Clapham Common. So surely it was just wrong of the Metropolitan Commissioner to refuse to reach agreement with the organisers to find a way so the vigil could go ahead, but to do so safely. Does she agree with the Joint Committee on Human Rights that the law on protests during this COVID pandemic needs clarifying so that protests can go ahead but do so safely? The Joint Committee on Human Rights has drafted regulations which will be published with our report later this week. Will she undertake to consider them seriously with a view to laying them before the House?
Secretary. Well, I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her comments, and look, I think everybody across this House, has expressed shock, grief, and obviously concern about the images from Saturday evening. No dispute there whatsoever. I will, of course, look at the report when it is published. I'd be more than happy to have discussions with colleagues about the report as well. We are in a pandemic, and this has been a very, very difficult period. It's been difficult for the police as well. I'm the first to acknowledge that. We've asked the police to do unprecedented things. They have unprecedented powers throughout this pandemic based on the need to protect public health. One would hope now that collectively, with the incredible work of the vaccine rollout and as we ensure that that carries on smoothly, as we move through the Prime Minister's roadmap and the plan of easements, that we can work together to absolutely, yes, live with coronavirus, but do things differently.
We now go to Faye Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I join colleagues across the House in sending my heartfelt condolences to Sarah Everard's loved ones. I'm shocked at the way in which Saturday night's vigil was policed. The situation demanded sensitivity and compassion, something which was evidently lacking. But I'm also shocked that what started as a peaceful and important vigil turned into a protest with photographs showing ACAB signs, which stands for All Cops Are Bastards. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm concerned that a young woman's murder could be hijacked by those who would seek to defund the police and destabilise our society, making it even harder for women to come forward and report assaults. Would the Home Secretary confirm that nothing will deter the government from delivering stronger legislation to protect women and girls from harm?
Home Secretary. My honourable friend is absolutely right, and I thank her for her points that she has made. We will continue absolutely to do everything in terms of our strategies, policies and laws going forward to protect women and to ensure that they are safeguarded in the right way. But at the same time, she's made a very, very important point that a peaceful vigil on Saturday turned into some pretty ugly scenes. So we'll wait for the report, and there is no question that where there are lessons to be learned, they will be learned. And of course, where individuals were acting inappropriately in the way in which she has said, obviously that'll be subject to some consideration too.
We now go to Rosie Duffield.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Firstly, I'd like to put on record my thanks to Kent Police for their incredibly difficult work in the ongoing investigation into the tragic death of Sarah Everard. In order to seriously tackle violence against women and girls, it's vital to put women at the heart of legislation. However, in today's policing bill, women are not even mentioned. With that in mind, and with rape convictions being at a shocking all-time low, how will the Home Secretary ensure that women can come forward with confidence that they will be believed and that they will receive justice? Thank
Secretary.
you.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. If I may, I'd just also like to give my thank to Kent Police for all the work that they have been doing in conjunction with the Metropolitan Police in the investigation associated with the Sarah Everard case. This has been a very, very difficult time across policing, there's no doubt about that. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm not going to come back in details to the points because I have covered many already in my statement. But I speak with conviction in my determination, as does every member of this government, when it comes to safeguarding women and also our strategies and approach to violence against women and girls. And as I've repeatedly said, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would welcome all members to join us in a cross-party effort to do much more to give women and girls the confidence to come forward.
Sir Charles Walker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, this House criminalised the freedom of protest. This House, us. Not Dame Cressida, not the Metropolitan Police. We did. We criminalised the freedom to protest collectively. We are up to our eyeballs in this. Does the Home Secretary, my right honourable friend, agree with me that now is the time to decriminalise freedom of protest? Not tomorrow, not next week, but this afternoon, this evening. Let's get people back on the streets. Let's allow people to get things off their chest again. Protest is a safety valve.
Home Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I understand entirely the sentiment that my right honourable friend has emphasised and echoed this afternoon. The Prime Minister has laid out a roadmap, and I appreciate that the right honourable gentleman would love me to say right now, let's just do this and change things immediately. There is a roadmap that has been laid out. We are still in a pandemic, and we are following with the guidance that has been put in place. And obviously this will be subject to debate over the next week or so, and I'm more than happy to continue to discuss this with my colleagues.
We now go to Vicky Foxcroft.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Peaceful assembly must be an absolute right in this country, and the actions of the police on Saturday were deeply troubling. And I'd like to highlight the use of kettling in particular. Many disabled people and disabled people's organisations have long raised concerns about the use of this controversial crowd control tactic, which in the past has been used for up to 10 hours with serious potential health implications. What does the Home Secretary have to say to the many disabled people who fear this disproportionate policy?
Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, in response to the Honourable Lady's question around operational tactics, which obviously kettling is based upon a situation and a police assessment around a protest or an event that might take place. That is obviously something that the police themselves make a decision on and judgments on in terms of the tactics that they use as part of their operations. She's also, though, raised an important point about people with disability, disabled people, should they wish to express themselves, join protests and participation. And of course, their needs can be met through protests and the way in which they express themselves by working with the police. And many of the organisers that talk to the police around the types of people, the groups, and the type of characteristics of the individuals that are coming out to protest as well. So this isn't just about, a one-size-fits-all approach. She will be well aware as to the approach that the police take when it comes to organisations and engaging with organisers over protests.
Thank you. We now go to Laura Farris.
Speaker, and I'd like to put on record my sympathies to the family and partner of Sarah Everard. I thank my right honourable friend for her statement. In the last few months, I've been working with Our Streets Now on the issue of public street harassment, vile and explicit language that is aimed at women with the purpose of degrading them, and they are often children, schoolgirls. I look forward to my right honourable friend's strategy later this year, but would she also consider, as part of that, bringing forward legislation that might address this issue?
Well, my friend has raised an important point, and in fact I've met many young girls, schoolgirls in fact, who are part of that campaign. We will consider all options as part of the VOG strategy.
We now go to Alison Thulis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On Sunday, I shed a tear along with so many other women at the gates of Queen's Park, where ribbons and tributes had been left in memory of Sarah Everard, and for Moira Jones, who was raped and murdered there in 2008, and for all women who've experienced abuse at the hands of men. So can I ask what the Home Secretary is going to do to change the toxic culture that we have, which diminishes and minimises women's experience, and to challenge this whole spectrum of men's behaviour, so that my daughter and all young women can grow up without living their lives in fear?
Home Secretary.
Well, the Honourable Lady has an opportunity as well to join us, and she's heard me speak today, Madam Deputy Speaker, as all colleagues have, about the need to contribute to our VOG strategy. This isn't about the work of one individual. This is about what we do collectively together in terms of cultural norms and changing behaviours. We all have a role to play, and I urge her to join us in that effort.
We now go to Heather Wheeler.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank my right honourable friend for a statement and extend my heartfelt condolences to Sarah Everard's family at this time? Does my right honourable friend agree with me and my South Derbyshire constituents that it is frankly absurd for the party opposite to, in the same breath, call for tougher sentences against rapists, whilst also opposing this bill, which delivers exactly this?
Well, my honourable friend has summed it up perfectly, and I completely agree with the sentiment that she's just expressed.
We now go to Tonia Antoniazzi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Last week on the Armed Forces Bill Committee, we heard about prosecuting crimes, including rape, through the military courts. One statement stood out for me where it was said, our service people are thoroughly good people, but they drink too much. Something goes wrong and they end up in court. Now, what discussions has her department had around this attitude towards victims of male violence? And does this reflect a general attitude to women that we saw on Saturday on Clapham Common?
Home Secretary.
Well, I think first of all, no, it does not reflect a general attitude to women, and no one should prejudge or just make assumptions of that nature. In terms of, she's made a very important point though, in terms of the armed forces work and the work that's taking place across both our departments, in fact, and our Minister for Safeguarding has done extensive work on this particular issue with our colleagues in the Ministry of Defence, and of course that will continue.
We now go to Caroline Noakes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I express my condolences to Sarah Everard's friends and family and thank the Home Secretary for reopening the Vaughan consultation and for requesting the lessons learned review into Saturday night's policing. She has shown that she is determined there will be action, not just words. 78,000 responses so far is absolutely enormous. These are women who do not have confidence in the system at present, and we desperately need to instill confidence for them. That will take an enormous effort in shifting cultures, in coming together and working collectively to make sure we achieve that aim. But can my right honourable friend assure me that those women are going to have their voices heard in the Justice Task Force, which looks suspiciously like an all-male room?
Home Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank my right honourable friend for her points and obviously the importance and significance of the Vaughan consultation and the fact that that's been reopened. Let me give her assurance that the Crime and Justice Task Force is not a male show at all. Both myself, I am obviously as part of that, as is the Safeguarding Minister. And there are many other agencies and parties that are involved in that, including the first female Metropolitan Police Commissioner as well. So there are a range of voices. And again, I would urge people from being too judgmental that all the work that takes place in government is just by men, because it is not.
Again, just a reminder to colleagues that we do need to be quite brief in our questions if we're going to be able to get everybody in, which I do want to do. I'm sure the way will be led by Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to add my thoughts and condolences to the families of Sarah Everard, Beba Henry and Nicole Smallman and all women who have died violently. Does the Home Secretary agree with me that if you're black, disabled or a trans woman, you are disproportionately more likely to be a victim of violence? This is not emphasised in the Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill. And what steps is she taking to rectify this? Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Home Secretary.
I thank the Honourable Lady. We want to prevent anyone from becoming a victim of crime. And it is not just our conviction, determination, but it should be our collective imperative to make sure that no one becomes a victim, and particularly anybody from the groups that she has just referred to.